It's my pleasure to have with me Chief John Moon, who is the former Assistant Chief of EMS for Pittsburg Fire and EMS. We have spent this afternoon talking about the legacy of Freedom House ambulance service, and it's a wonderful opportunity to have you here. So welcome, Chief.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure, and the honor is all mine.
So, we talked about the legacy of Freedom House and about all of the long-lasting ripple effect that the work that came from Freedom House has had within the pre-hospital EMS community. Basically, anyone who's ever taken an ambulance, received care from a paramedic or an EMT can owe that care and the processes that went into that care to Freedom House. How does that make you feel as being, part of that legacy?
Well, it's actually a joy and an honor. And just sitting here speaking about it kind of fulfills the joy of my heart, because it's a part of history that's kind of been dormant for well over 50 plus years. And once I retired from Pittsburg EMS, I've kind of gone on this personal mission to try and bring this part of history back into the forefront where it belongs.
And that's really just so important, because like so much of our history, because we've contributed in so many ways to so many innovative things, whether it be in medicine or science, technology, law, whatever it is, those things nowadays especially seem to be on the front lines of being stripped away. It's almost as if people want to eliminate this history. And so to have someone that's willing to go out and continue to tell that story is so meaningful. Tell us a little bit about what it was like back when the decisions were made that, hey, we've got to solve a problem of how do we get people who are acutely ill or injured from our community in the Hill to the care that they need literally down the hill at the hospital.
Well, it's interesting because the Hill District at that time, and we're going back into the late 60s, was a somewhat underserved, neglected community. In this community, housing was a problem, jobs were a problem, medical care was a problem. The political powers during that time frame didn't care very much about the community, so it was kind of held captive within our own boundaries. You had residents there that couldn't make it back and forth to doctor's appointments. And the problem with that is we also had to rely on the police to get you back and forth, to get you to the emergency room. And most people can't identify with that nowadays because the police were not necessarily in Pittsburgh and the Hill District, but throughout the country were the primary transport system to get you back and forth to the emergency room. And it worked well, with the exception that in the Hill District, I would say we had what we would call an adversarial relationship with law enforcement. They didn't particularly care about the members of the community, and the community didn't trust them.
Right.
And so in that time frame, the police, they determined whether they wanted to come get you, whether they wanted to transport, how long it wanted to take them to get there. And if you could imagine a police wagon pulling up in front of your residence with two white officers getting out and escorting you in the back and placing you into a police wagon that perhaps they just transported a prisoner or a deceased individual to the morgue. And you're lying back there because both officers got up front, and away you went to the emergency room. The problem with that is if something happened to you back there, you stopped breathing or your heart stopped beating, there was no one back there to help you. And as I mentioned, that was the norm throughout the country. And it was somewhat problematic in the Hill District because of the time delay. And, born out of that was a community organization called Freedom House Enterprise Incorporated. And they were sort of a community forefront that were primarily responsible for job placement and job training, voter registration, There was even a mini food bank in this storefront organization in the 2100 block of Center Avenue. And it had a board of directors, which consisted of people from foundations and attorneys and things. And one of the board of directors, a gentleman by the name of Phil Hallen, he had a vision. And that vision at that time was, if this community can deliver food to the residents of this underserved community, why can't they deliver medical care? And at that particular time, it was just a vision. And the board of directors agreed with him, but they didn't know how to get that into operation. So he reached out to the local hospital, which was Presbyterian Hospital at that time, which is now UPMC, and they put him in touch with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Safford, who was chairperson of the critical care medicine department as well as the anesthesiology department. Now, Dr. Safford was a visionary in his own right. And it was his vision that it wasn't how fast you got that person to the emergency room that determined the outcome, but what was being done for them before they got there. And he had problems getting his vision out to the world. The medical community kind of turned their back. The political arena wouldn't accept it. He's done research after research, or even invented CPR and how to breathe for people. And he couldn't get anyone to accept his vision. So up comes this organization with the need to improve medical care in the community. And it was sort of like what I would call a marriage. And Dr. Safford saw an opportunity to get his vision out to the world. And the Freedom House Incorporated saw an opportunity to get their vision out to the members of the community. And they had one request, that every person you train had to be black. And he agreed to that. So he takes 25 black men at that time, myself included, and he put us through the most intense training program that had ever been done anywhere in this country. We spent time in the emergency room, not actually observing, but treating patients. Time in intensive care units, in the coronary care unit, in the morgue studying anatomy and physiology, in the animal lab, in the operating room. I'm the very first person in this country with a high school education to go into an operating room and do a tracheal intubation on an anesthetized patient that had never been done before. And I'm also the first person in the country to take that skill less than a week later out of the hospital, out into the field, and perform it into a person's home. So we basically were the trailblazers and the groundbreakers of any type of pre-hospital care that exists today that most people take for granted.
Absolutely. And as an emergency physician who works in EMS and oversees the training of EMTs and paramedics and reviewing of protocols and all of those things, it's not surprising to me, because I know our history and our innovative nature and the problems that we constantly and historically solve when no one else wants to solve problems for us or on our behalf. But, you know, I think what people need to understand is that everything that they now see and literally take for granted when they pick up the phone and call 911, from the moment that medic unit or that first responder unit is dispatched, the protocols have not changed very much. The whole concept of the primary survey, the ABCs, the concept of rescue breathing and chest compressions, the concept of pre-hospital intubation, which for those who are not necessarily medically inclined means putting that breathing tube in so that you can deliver oxygen to a non-breathing patient, so that the patient that arrives in the emergency department is a viable patient who still has an opportunity to not only just survive, but survive and thrive in a meaningful way. All of those things can be traced back to the roots of this tree right here in the hill here in Pittsburgh. And that's a story that, unfortunately has not been told enough. I think it should be in the curriculum of the National Paramedic Registry. I think this story should be told, because certainly if the story came from other sources, they'd be telling that story in the first chapter of the curriculum. So again, I'm I'm honored to be able to have this conversation with you and to have you and your colleagues be a part of this conference. We felt that we could not do Freedom House justice, or even EMS in general justice, to have a conference here in Pittsburgh, literally less than a mile and a half from the Hill where it all started, without recognizing the work that you're doing. How does it feel to know that now there is a national federal legislative movement in Congress, and hopefully soon to be in the Senate, to properly recognize the work that you all have done and the accomplishments? Because I understand that you all did not do this for the recognition. You did it to save lives in your community. But how does it feel to now, 50 or so years later, to know that there's this movement to recognize the work and the legacy?
Well, to put it bluntly, it makes my heart smile, primarily because it's part of that mission of fulfilling the desires of my heart and to keep this part of history back into the forefront. And it's amazing because we at Freedom House wrote the very first paramedic training manual, Emergency Care in the Streets, that every paramedic in the country were required to read in order to become a paramedic in the United States. And as more and more editions of that book are published, I noticed that Freedom House is removed from any mention in the book. They talk about how great the systems are in Los Angeles and Seattle and Jacksonville and Miami and who created them. And they list Freedom House as just a group of black men that didn't have an opportunity to get a high school education. But we wrote the manual. So those are the types of things that I look at as motivating factors to try and make sure that this part of history remains in the forefront. One of my goals, and I would love to see that, and you kind of touched on it, is I would love to see the history of EMS taught in every EMT training program, every paramedic training program, every emergency physician's training program, because that's the specialty now that became evident at Freedom House. So it's amazing that the foundation of every EMS system in the United States rests on the shoulders of an organization known as Freedom House Ambulance Service. And as I mentioned, we were labeled as the least likely to succeed.
Right.
And when I think about that, society made one mistake. They didn't tell us. So we were more like living in the moment, providing a much needed service to this neglected, underserved community, and was born out of that, the foundation of every EMS system that we take for granted today.
And we are so thankful for that. There are generations of individuals and families in the Hill and beyond that owe more than just their lives to this, but the legacy of entire families that would have or could have stopped had Freedom House not been there to provide that life-sustaining, life-saving care that allowed literally a family's lineage to continue. So on behalf of those families, on behalf of pre-hospital providers all over the country, emergency physicians all over the country, I just want to thank you personally and just say that I will be a torchbearer for this story and for this legacy wherever I find myself, to make sure that any students, whether they be paramedic students, EMT students, medical students, nursing students, anyone that I come in contact with in my educational experiences with them in the emergency department, clearly understand that, that patient that just arrived by ambulance, let me tell you a story, because I think that's how the legacy continues. So whatever we can do at the NMA, I know I speak for our leadership in this regard, just because although I don't know every single leader at that national level, I do know what the organization stands for. So on behalf of the NMA, I want to thank you.
Thank you so much. And like I mentioned, you're helping me fulfill the desires of my heart. So the honor and the privilege is all mine. So I really can't thank you enough for this opportunity.